I think it's important to address the difference between the primary and secondary schizoids again, and this is because it's going to influence the sort of content that is relevant to that individual. I made this distinction because the inner subjective experience of the primary schizoid differs significantly from the inner subjective experience of the secondary schizoids. Both the primary and secondary schizoid are going to face challenges in social relationships. However, the underlying causes are going to be different, and also the way that they engage with people socially is also going to be different. The main difference between the primary and secondary schizoid is when defense mechanisms come into play. The primary schizoid defense mechanisms come into play before the age of individuation, which is the age whereby an individual recognizes himself as a distinct being, separate from others, and has formed a self-concept, a cohesive self-concept. So the difference between the two is that the primary schizoid has formed defenses before establishing a cohesive self-concept and a distinct sense of self, whereas the secondary schizoid is going to have more of a sense of the difference between self and others. The primary schizoid's sense of self is a lot more fragmented, and so they're going to have a lot more split and divides in their psyche, which is going to cause a range of phenomenon that is exclusive to the primary schizoid, so it isn't going to be relevant to the secondary schizoid. The secondary schizoid is going to have a lot more issues with self and other. Even though their sense of self has been formed, there will be some difficulties in self-functioning, and it may be that for different reasons their self-concept isn't fully developed in the way that other people's have, or it's not developed in a healthy way as a consequence of their life experiences. But the main difference is that we're looking at a group of people, the primary schizoid, who created defenses before self-concept and integrated self-concept was developed, and a group of people who have more of a self-concept. And this makes a big difference in their thoughts and feelings and experiences in relation to others. So, for example, the secondary schizoid isn't going to relate so much to the full self system as the primary schizoid is. And this is because their full self system isn't going to be as developed, isn't going to be such a split between the true self and the full self, and they're less likely to engage in passive identification and mirroring, and also there's going to be less of a pull to be compliant with others in the moment because they have a sense of self. That sense of self is going to have some bearing on the situation. It's going to come into play more. So, for example, if we look at avoidant personality disorder, who are in the secondary schizoid category, we're going to find that there's a lot more thought about self versus others because the self-concept is stronger and more cohesive than in the primary schizoid. So, for example, they're going to do a lot of thinking about how are other people judging me? if I take this action, what if this goes wrong? I'm going to be negatively judged. I feel that other people aren't going to understand me or accept me or like me. And I feel ashamed to do things wrong because that's going to make me feel really bad if I'm negatively judged. So there's a lot of I's and me's in their cognitive functioning because they are trying to protect themselves, similar to the primary schizoid. However, the way in which they're going about it is different. They're a lot more actively conscious about the avoidant process. It's a lot more about how they interact with the physical world and not putting themselves into certain situations in the physical world. And so the self-other concept is more prevalent. Another category in the secondary schizoid is the autistic schizoid. Now, people on the autistic spectrum, they have a difficulty connecting with others in the external world, but there's more of a sense of self and other, in a sense that many of autistic people, they want to be accepted for who they are, and they want to be understood for who they are, only because they're different in the way that they think and function. A lot of times they don't get that they don't get that understanding that they want. Also, they can have a very strong personal connection to the world, in the sense that they can have like special interest, and they can engage in a lot of active research, and they can have a lot of personal investment. In order to have that personal investment, they need to have some sort of self-concept that can have that personage. And because they have more of a developed self-concept, they aren't going to experience a full self-system in the way that the primary schizoid does, and they aren't going to passively identify with other people. In fact, identifying with other people is really one of their major challenges, and reading other people, reading social cues. So they don't have the hyperpermeability of other people's thoughts and feelings in the same way that the primary schizoid does. Then when we look at somebody with complex post-traumatic disorder who may have been diagnosed with Schizoid Personality Disorder in DSM-5, they have a self-concept that has been consciously traumatized through negative occurrences, and they are trying to protect themselves from further hurt or harm, and they're going to be very conscious of wanting to protect themselves from hurt and harm, because they have a self that has been consciously traumatized, and they can be reliving flashbacks, and they can have associations to places and things that they just really can't deal with because of the unfortunate situations that they've been through in the past. And so they're very aware of how their self is reacting, responding, and interacting with the external world. So their self-other concept is intact. Whereas with the primary schizoid, there isn't going to be this conscious fear or this conscious reenactment of trauma. I mean, it's possible that a primary schizoid could go through a very traumatic event, and experience this, but it's not primarily something that they're going to go through, even though they are distancing themselves from other people. There's less of a sense of self and others, and self and others isn't really a dynamic that they're consciously finding to be conflicting or difficult. If anything, with the primary schizoid, most of the conflicts are within the self versus the self, rather than the self versus others. So you can see that it's quite a different dynamic. Now, there are more people who fall into the secondary schizoid category, and secondary schizoid category will all resonate with the DSM-5 criteria. However, there will be some primary schizoid who don't really fully resonate with the DSM-5 criteria, and the reason why is because the full self system will enable the primary schizoid to possibly be quite sociable, to interact with a wide range of people, whereas those in the secondary schizoid category they're going to be isolated. Some of the primary schizoids will be isolated in the same way. When I say isolated, I mean that they're going to have really few social contacts and not really want to be around people so much because of their difficulty in dealing with people. The primary schizoid doesn't have the same difficulties in dealing with people because the primary schizoid will passively identify with people, mirror people instinctively, to the point where maintaining harmony with people is a natural, instinctual part of their operation. Though they could get to the point where they withdraw from all social activities through choice, it is a different dynamic. So there's a lot more to explain about these two categories. As I said, there's more people in the secondary schizoid category than I've mentioned. However, I've mentioned the main ones. And so this is why a lot of the secondary schizoids there's a lot of primary schizoid phenomenology that just isn't going to apply to the secondary schizoid. Although they can have some similar symptoms and manifestations in their life,